first speaker. Oh. Yes, sir. And so this morning we have Dr. Hogue from the ASA MNRA, and he's been instrumental in, he's been the lead on putting together the Army People Strategy, and then specifically has been overseeing the development of the military implementation plan. So I got to work with Dr. Hogue and his team when we did the MIP 1.0, and right now they're working on the MIP 2.0, so we can look forward to the new opportunities and initiatives that MIP will be taking on. Sir?
All right, we're all good to go. Good morning, everyone. Mic working? Good up top? You're okay. So thank you for that kind introduction, Dr. Keith. I'm honored and thrilled, actually, and exceptionally humbled to be a guest speaker this morning. Yesterday was a great day, kicked off by, of course, General Martin. General Foley, good to see you and be here with you. General Funk, if you're here or later, and of course, Dr. Maddie's conversation. And then all of you that are in this room, and then I think we're up to 300 or so participants that may be online. I just think that that's fantastic. And it's always great to get out of Washington and get back on an Army installation and see soldiers and to see DA civilians doing what you guys do best, and just being a part of this symposium is really a highlight for me, and hopefully if I'm any good today, maybe a highlight for you. We'll have to wait and see. If I had to put a title on the talk this morning, it's, in line with this symposium, it's what have we learned, or what have we learned lately? And in the next 30 minutes or so, I wanted to just kind of walk through with you kind of the evolution of the Army People Strategy, give you a little bit of historical context in case, there's some gaps there in your knowledge about it. And then what we've learned in this era of having the Army People Strategy. And then maybe a call to action or a challenge towards the end, 10 minutes or so, and what we can do to make the Army People Strategy a success in the future. I was just talking to Colonel Tawana Robinson, who was in the talent management, and it's always great to just kind of run in. It's interesting, when I was checking in yesterday, someone said, I know you, I've been in one of your OPTs, and the Army People Strategy has just been a wonderful thing over the last couple of years. But listening to General Martin talk yesterday about the NCO Corps and how we had to rebuild it, and, it made me think of a quick story I just wanted to share with you. First, I wanted to ask in the room, I can't see online, but is there any former enlisted folks? I just wanted to see my tribe. Yes, I just wanted to connect with my tribe. In a minute, I'm going to just let you know a little bit about kind of my background, not a lot, but just I wanted to see you guys, and thank you for your service. But listen to General Martin talk, and he talked about like the timelines of how things happen. And in 1985, 9 months under my belt in the Army, I showed up at the Jungle Operations Training Center at Fort Sherman, and I was in process, and S1, S2, S3, going through the whole thing. And this master sergeant, very seasoned in the Army, said, you're going to do something while you're down here, or you're going to waste your time. And I was this 19-year-old PFC. I had a year in college, so I got, a little extra rank when I showed up at my first duty assignment. And I said, well, I don't want to waste my time. He said, okay, I tell you what you're going to do. And he pulled out, I shared this in the group in one of the breakout yesterday, pulled out the enrollment form for the Army distance learning courses. And I signed. The next thing you know, my barracks was full of these yellow front page, and they lined the rest of my barracks for like the next 3 years that I was in Panama. And kind of gave me a jump start on things in the Army, but I don't want to focus so much on that part, but I want to focus on the NCO that he was, who did not give me the opportunity to walk out of there without a way ahead. He basically told me, this is what you're going to do. And I think, I'm sure NCOs are out there doing that now, but I'd like to see more of that, where just people are, I think in one of the documents that we had, a report or something, was called invasive leadership, where we're getting kind of away from some of the 101 stuff. And I know I'd like to see where just people are hands-on again and just like, this is what you're going to do to be successful. And so I just wanted to kind of echo that. And that was really powerful that when he said that yesterday, made that story come back to me. So as introduced, I'm Lyle Hogue. I'm the director of the Strategy, Plans, and Operations Office in the ASA M&RA. I retired as an Army Sergeant Major. My last assignment was one of Jrotc School, as a U.S. Army Infantry Center and school back then, before armor rolled down there. And I worked for a couple of great generals there. One was General Ben Frakely, and the other one was, I forget his first name, but Major General Wachakowski. Some of you may recall those names. And 18 out of my 22 years in the Army, though, I was in recruiting and retention jobs. So I spent my career talking to families and civilians and soldiers about both the challenges of the Army and also the benefits of the Army. And one thing you'll take away from me is I am super proud of my service. I hope every one of you are the same way. You are a member of a small group of people, civilian or uniform, that chose to serve the Army. And it's a unique calling, and my hat's to all of you for serving. And I'll always take that away from my time, my 22 years in the Army, and what I did. Later, I worked at IBM after I retired, and I still was gravitating towards the Army. I worked on a project of theirs called the Army Career Tracker. Anybody ever heard of that? All right, so I was one of the teammates who built the wire diagrams, which hung the website for all the Army Career Tracker things. We had great hopes for that, as far as how a soldier could kind of manage their career with a mentor and a leader. And so that was very rewarding. And then 13 years ago or so, I started my federal service in the Office of Business Transformation. I took a quick 2 years out of that, and I went and worked at the Military Compensation Modernization Commission, MICRMIC it's called, where we brought DOD the blended retirement system. Then in 2015, I returned back to the Army staff and the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower, ASA M&RA. And I've been with them ever since. It's interesting, though, and it kind of fits in with all of what we're getting at, so I'm not just trying to give you my resume, but the ASA M&RA has been trying to get a good foothold in the strategy arena for years. When I went there 7 years ago, we had an office, and it was called the Strategic Integration Office. And our big effort back then was the Human Dimension Strategy. I don't know if any of you remember the Human Dimension Strategy, but we were trying to implement the XORD that the Army had signed out for the Human Dimension Strategy. When that office leadership changed, we merged that office, or moved it to an office called Plans, Integration, and Futures Office. And our big effort there was Annex H to the Army strategy. So back then, we were building, or G357 was building the Army strategy, and we were going to have several annexes to that, and the Annex H was people, and we were working on that during that time frame. Secretary Esper came in, decided not to have annexes attached to the Army strategy, and just published a standalone Army strategy in 2018. And so we stood down that work. The next year, we get an ASA M&RA, Dr. Casey Wardynski, and obviously he came on board and he made some changes, and we morphed into the Strategic Plans and Operations, of which we are most notable for the Army People Strategy and its related implementation plans. And so, however, with all of that, I want to make it clear to everyone that's in the room and online, and a lot of people who've been on a OPT with me will say, yeah, he says this all the time. The APS, Army People Strategy, and the annexes are a total Army accomplishment. There has to be someone who schedules the OPTs, that gives deadlines, that gets buy-in, that pesters people for documents. That was us. But without the collective effort of Jrotc, G1, U.S. Military Academy, ARI, I'm probably forgetting some. You know, whenever they say you start naming lists, you're going to forget someone. I apologize if I did. But I'm real big on getting a big group of people, because you get the best possible answers when you do that. And so in the people enterprise, we collected as many people who wanted to be a part to help us write the people strategy, to help, well, even Annex H, we're working closely with Jrotc headquarters back in the human dimension strategy, and all of that's always been a team effort. So let me go to the next slide here. This is going to be a busy slide, so just bear with me here. On the left side, there we go. So you see on the left side, this is kind of like past and future, or where we've been, where we're at, where we're going. And I use this a lot to kind of just orient people to what we've done. I want to call your attention to what I just kind of read through, just as a recap. Started at the bottom. This is all of the efforts that we were doing towards people. And then in 2019, we had our first Army People Strategy in the Army ever signed by the Secretary of the Army, Chief of Staff of the Army, and the Sergeant Major of the Army. And that was signed in October of 2019. We call it 2020 because of the fiscal year. It made its debut at the AUSA that fall, and we've been busy ever since. As strategies go, the Army People Strategy is rather descriptive than it is prescriptive. And sometimes that kind of perceived ambiguity caused a little uneasiness in that, hey, why aren't you directly telling me what to do, and that. And so we dealt with a little bit with that. But the reason is very simple, is that we needed the future of the Army People Strategy and the outcomes and the end states, we needed that to be very agile. You never can really tell. I think it was General Martin who talked about way out in the future gets fuzzier and fuzzier. And that's absolutely true when you're doing these documents and you're trying to write out. Even, you know, we kicked this off and it was 2028. If you read the pages, the current Secretary in Chief had now moved that to 2030 with a look out to 2040 and 2050 when we get way out there. But we needed it to be agile. So the people strategy has our vision of where we want to go. That won't change. Cohesive teams that are fit and trained. I'm going to go over in a little bit and talk about specifically some of the end states, because I think they're very unique and special of where we want to go. The mission of the Army People Strategy and the end states. But a lot of the success, or almost all the success of the APS, will be from our ability to adapt and adjust it to changing times, right? And we're going through one of those changing times right now with the acquire line of effort. If you read any latest newspaper or headlines, you know that we are experiencing challenging times in our recruiting effort. And so, you know, we have to do some adjustments for that. So what have we learned? One of the things that we learned, not that I use this word, but it was easy to write a strategy. It was easy to write the Army People Strategy, right? We were excited about where we wanted to take the people enterprise. What we learned was what was difficult is implementation. Implementation is where the hard work begins. And so, you know, we were sitting there, and the Army People Strategy, I'm sure all of you have had a copy or looked at it. It's about 14 or 15 pages. It's not, you know, it's very readable in an hour or so. And we were sitting there and we're like, okay, how are we going to now bring these pages so that they actually mean something to Army people, Army civilians, Army families, where we get things done, where we move the Army where we want to go? How are we going to do that? And the answer was really effective implementation plans. And so in 2020, we signed this in October of 2019. In 2020, you see, as we go over, we did the implementation plan for the military and the civilian side of the Army. Real quick comment on that. The APS is, if you read it, is meant to be kind of cohort agnostic. In other words, when you read the pages, you can't tell that something's talking about the military or something's talking about civilians. And they're two different distinct groups, all with the same mission and vision of in places that we're going. But we wrote the implementation plans for those cohorts, and we wrote the strategy to be one strategy for everyone. And so in 2021, the MIP implementation, or I'm sorry, the MIP and SIP implementation plan had about 99 tasks and some 400 milestones was how we measured our progress, things that we were doing, things that we had engaged all the stakeholders with, and they came back and said, this is what we're going to work on for the acquire line of effort, for the develop line of effort, for the employ line of effort, for the retain line of effort. And then we reported out on how we were tracking towards those milestones. One thing we noticed was we had the MIP and SIP, and they're aligned closely to the LOEs that I just pointed out. But we have many other annexes that were also done in 2020. DEI annex, we had sexual assault and prevention annex, we had people analytics annex. I mean, so a lot of other things in the people space that kind of was hung on to the people strategy. And we found that we wanted to start integrating them into the MIP and the SIP. And so in 2022, we did that. We rolled all of that into the MIP and SIP, and the task went up to 248 tasks and right under 800 milestones that we're looking at this year and making forward progress on all of those. So it's a big endeavor that we're moving towards. One thing we learned about this is the immensity of the people enterprise. It is huge. But it is very important that we do a great job in implementing the strategy. So we all know that the people strategy, as I talked about, has 4 lines of effort. And one important thing is we made sure that the Army people strategy nests with the Army strategy of 2018. 2018's line of, in the Army strategy, line of effort 3 is reform, which says you'll bring about a talent management system into the Army. So that was back in 2018. And so we, a lot of the Army people strategy, as I'll get to in a minute, is about talent management, right? Without being or stating a talent management strategy. But just real quickly, as we're looking at the Army people strategy, the acquire line of effort, market, how we're going to market our talent, how we're going to recruit our talent, how we're going to onboard our talent. And we're very busy in this space, as you can imagine, but not just now. We've been busy in the acquire line of effort, in the acquire people space. It's the main effort of the people strategy, going on 3 years now. And even back before then, the lifeblood of our Army is our talent acquisition. Every year, we have to put in and compose 1, 2, and 3, roughly 120-ish thousand people, new people, have to come into the Army. And so it's a big challenge to our sessions apparatus, and that's on the enlisted side. When I say in sessions, obviously all of you know that it's the enlisted side and it's your officer side too. So there's another 4,000 or 5,000 of those folks that are coming in every year into our Army. So big operation. Develop, which you guys are well aware of, the develop talent line of effort is about training, educating, and credentialing our talent, and had a great conversation in here yesterday about education and about credentialing. I found the conversations very fascinating. Employ is how we're going to identify our talent, align our talent with the talent demands of our organizations, and advance that talent. And then lastly, retain, how we're going to engage, authentic leader engagement, compensate our folks. And I had a question yesterday about compensating differently. When it's necessary. I remember General Martin using that kind of quotations. When it's necessary, we really need to look at doing things differently in this compensation arena or in other areas. And then lastly, retain line of effort is transitioning people. We really need to do some work at permeability and moving people from one status to another status and having a lot of fluidity, if you will, and capitalizing on our strengths. And so there's been a lot of efforts that started on that. We have 4 critical enablers in the Army People Strategy: 21st century talent management, improve quality of life, which all of you have probably read some of these things in the headlines, and Army culture. Now we're talking about a lot of things in terms of climate, but to me and maybe some of you, there's some nuanced difference between climate and culture. But we had Army culture as a critical enabler in 2019 and in the Army People Strategy. And then resources and authorities is just, you would be surprised at the many things that we need to have law changes done in order to do things. And I was surprised, being in the MNRA, we're only allowed a certain amount of changes to a request for changes to law per year. And they are way out. I think we do them like 3 or 4 years in the future. And so if you miss this year, you're out to 2025 or so. It's like the PALM process almost, with these UBLs, I believe they're called. And so we really have to kind of prioritize, and Brett Funk and Mike Arnold, who will be with you or might be out in the crowd somewhere, they will talk a little bit, I think, in talent management, because they pushed us the envelope on a lot of things that they were working on and needing changes both to Army policy and also to legislative changes. So that's happened in that. Interestingly, the Army People Strategy has 6 near-term priorities. So like I said, for 14 pages, it was chock full of things to get after and things to get busy doing in the last few years. And we can already put a check mark in the W column for some of these near-term priorities. We stood up the Army Enterprise Marketing Office, moved it from Washington, D.C., moved it to Chicago, Illinois, where there's great marketing firms, and we stood up Functional Area 58s and a group of young, just creative officers that are out there with us now that are doing marketing for the Army. And so definitely a W there. We reduced civilian hiring time, which is very interesting because we went into COVID. And, I think General Martin made a comment about COVID punching us in the face, was I think the phrase that he said. And it's very interesting on how we were planning to do things. COVID came, and we saw changes even with COVID. And reducing hiring time went from something like 120 days down to 80. And if you're a civilian and if you ever hired someone, you kind of know the frustration I'm talking about, where you're trying to get talent onto your team and it takes 4 or 5, 6 months to do. And you run the risk of losing talent if it takes that long, because they're looking for a job now. And we reduced attrition in the training base in the last 3 years. So if you reached out to CIMT down there and General Klein, he'll be able to show you how we reduced attrition. A lot of this came about because of how we had to handle recruits going into basic training. It was different from how we did it just 6 months prior to that. Dr. Warditsky and I got to go down and visit Fort Jackson in the middle of, in June of 2020. So we were kicking off COVID. And we watched how it was just kind of mind-blowing how Army officers and Army NCOs who have a job and they were trained to do something, all of a sudden were becoming experts on how to deal with COVID and how to quarantine off these people, and this is a clean area and this is not, and making sure the two didn't mix. It was just fascinating on how they did that at Fort Jackson. And Fort Jackson is where we get a lion's share of our recruits go through there. And so we were very pleased with that and watching how that happened. But what we found from that, in addition to some changes with drill sergeants and basic training and all, was that attrition dropped. And it dropped very noticeably. And more kids were making it through basic training and AIT. And so that was good to see back then. Someone commented yesterday about ACMA, Army Civilian Career Management Agency, has now been stood up. You guys look for big things to come out of ACMA. That is going to be a phenomenal change to the Army civilian. So write that little acronym down, ACMA. There's something like, I think, 12 career branches now, or 13 or something. It used to be 45 or so, don't quote me on that. And so we're doing a really good job with the future of Army civilian. The new one is accepted service for cyber, and we're looking to do great things. So all of that aims us towards 4 strategic outcomes. And this is really where I think, you know, the heart of the Army People Strategy is. And so we need an Army that's ready. So there's an end state that says we have to be ready, professional, diverse, and integrated. And I think, you know, as you talk about any strategy in the Army, right, the first piece of it has to contribute to readiness. So first and foremost, the Army People Strategy must position the Army in a place to fight tonight and win tonight. So it's all about readiness. I'll comment real quick just so I don't lose it. You know, now we're doing the Army People Synchronization conferences 2 times a year. Some of you may have heard of those, where, I mean, we're bringing in like, you know, Corps G1s, Division G1s, and really matching up manning issues and getting to problems that we're seeing with future manning of units. And it's encompassing all of the Army People Strategy, from the acquire, develop, employ, lines of effort, retain, all affect our manning. And so we did a virtual or kickoff conference in January. Our in-person one is August 15th through the 19th in 2 locations. Day 1, senior one, starts at Fort Eustis, Virginia. The rest of the week is at Fort Knox with HRC, Jrotc, and all of those folks that I mentioned, just getting in a room, OPTs, hashing it out and getting things better for our Army when it comes to manning. But not that I don't have the entire Army People Strategy memorized, but I just don't want to miss a word or two. But some of the end states that we have for readiness is the Army uses a range of technologies, incentives, programs, and policies to identify talents of its people. And this was where a big change was. So you know, identifying talents of our people is kind of easy, because if we can get all of you individually to kind of buy into that, you'll come forward and say, hey, I can, yeah, I'm a, you know, combat arms guy, but I also have this unique talent or skill here that I did in a former job or wherever, and we just need to be able to start learning how to track that better. IPSA is going to help us with that. But also the unique talent demands of our organizations. And that's where a lot of the learning has been over the last couple of years, is getting those organizations to kind of forget about, hey, I'm down a truck driver, HRC, send me another one. And starting to kind of move towards, that's the move towards talent management. And so that's been a big change over the last couple of years, and getting that change down into what I call the bones of our organization. I think we still have some work to do in this area, but we're moving in the right direction. We talked a little bit about the next piece of this, where the end state applies to data-driven analytic tools for talent employment and development efforts, and drives a dynamic and accurate long-term workforce planning system. You know, we have to be able to project, and this goes back to the Army People Synchronization Conference, project when and where talent's going to be available in our Army, how we're going to develop that talent, and people with the skill sets to do that. We recently started or created a new office in the ASA M&RA called People Analytics, recognizing, right, the importance of analytics and data and how important it's going to be. And so Mr. Dan Shrimpton, some of you may have worked with him already. He's the lead up there, and he's already making an impact. I think he's been with us for about 6 or 8 months. IPSA is going to be huge. Some of you may know Colonel Rebecca Eggers, who works as a director of the IPSA program, fantastic officer who's, you know, knocking down deliverables and things that are needed to roll out IPSA later on this year. It also enables the Army to rapidly build appropriately talented special mission teams, cohesive teams that are trained, disciplined, and fit to win. You know, I think this is kind of one of the when we get to this place, you know, we're going to be getting really close. The idea of a special mission team that may have a talent that's in an officer and enlisted that's in the National Guard, that's paired with 2 people that are in the reserves, that are paired with 3 people that are in active duty, that are all getting after a special mission that's leadership is deemed needs to be accomplished. And you know, we've got to work through a lot of the permeability things. We've got to work through compensation things. But I mean, the idea of finding the talent in our huge army, over 1 million people, right, and putting them on the group on a team that knocks out a mission for us is really kind of one of our crown jewels that we want to get at. Let's spend a little time talking about our second outcome, which is a professional army. Let me just take a break. I want to make sure I think y'all gave me a little extra time, and, you know, being a former recruiter, I can take it. But I have the gift of gab. But I want to see if there's any questions before I get too far deep that I could just answer real quick. Anybody in the room? Because we're 1 strategic outcome into 4.
Hey, Dr. Hogue, this Chris Hughes question for you in terms of what you just articulated in terms of the line of effort 1 being very AI centric or IT centric, whatever that is, to accomplish that particular LOE. Who in the department has the lead for that? Is that your office? Is that Mr. Shrimpton? Because it's hard to find that person.
Yes, Mr. Dan Shrimpton.
Okay.
Yep. And then, you know, he teams with the G1 folks, you know, is, you know, specifically responsible for IPSA, and but people analytics is his world.
I think the question has always been is, you can find a lot of people in the people strategy to talk to about their portions of it, but when it comes to synergy for synchronization of the whole piece, who actually has approved and disapproved authority? So I'm glad to see Mr. Shrimpton's taken that.
Yeah,
role.
now I want to, you threw in a word there at the end, approval and disapproval authority. I just want to make sure that, you know, we're understanding, like Mr. Shrimpton, you know, like where I serve in the SPO, but then he'll, you know, there's appropriate leaders with approval and disapproval authorities when you're talking, you know, doing some type of an activity or authority or responsibility. That would probably be, or not probably, that would be the ASA MNRA, and then appropriate leaders on its way up to them.
Thank you.
Any other questions? That was a great one. Yes.
Okay, sir, we got a question from online.
Oh, yeah.
From Mr. Brian Cook. With all this effort, 200 plus tasks, 800 plus milestones, how do you track your failures and successes to induce iteration and collaboration?
Yeah, so we have a small team that's in my office that are ORSAs that are tracking movement towards accomplishments of these milestones. I'm going to get to here in a minute when we get to the other side of this chart. We start looking at FY23 and 25, where we're going to introduce more meaningful, I guess. Some people aren't really happy with milestones. They want measures of effectiveness, measures of performance. And there's some of that in MIP 1.0. But we have a dashboard that's reported out to leadership in APS governance forums, who, you know, there's a check there that as you're doing this kind of what I call lunch pail, blue collar, grunt-like work of implementation, and then you share that with leadership and show where we're having challenges, where we're having successes. You allow leadership to have an impact on the process. So every month we track accomplishments of those milestones and towards the task that are reported to leadership, and then when we come into executive level governance, we report those. And one thing that's my challenge is trying to report a lot of data to senior leaders in a way that they can consume it, get through it, have questions, have comments, and, you know, move through it, because I can't sit there with, like, you know, a spreadsheet of 5,000, you know, cells there and try to, you know, so we have to kind of distill it all down, which I think we're getting a pretty good handle on now going into our second year of implementation in FY22, where we have dashboards where we're moving across kind of green, amber, red kind of things, where we're showing progress. Good to go? Okay. Any other? Okay.
Yes, sir. Chaplain Roy Myers.
Hi.
How you doing this morning?
Good.
So just a quick question. As the chaplain corps is moving into outcomes-based kind of professional development, one of our challenges is that much of our professional development is done through the technical chain rather than AR 600-20, the command links. And so we're trying to leverage the Army Career Tracker where that's not going away. We're looking at ADIS as a possible kind of replacement of that. And I'm just wondering from your perspective, one of the things we need is kind of reporting chain or something like that so that we can kind of track it from higher.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wonder your perspective on ADIS and how you think that's developing.
ADAS as in, what's that stand for? I just want to make sure. I understand.
Army Training Information System.
There we go. And
Oh,
that's supposed to
ATIS.
replace,
Okay.
replace.
Yeah. I think that, I know that's an effort down, kind of in Jrotc, and I am not very familiar with kind of the bones of it, but I'd be more than happy to reach out with you and whoever in Jrotc to see and get you an answer to your question. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to spend the next couple of minutes talking about the second outcome or end state of the Army People Strategy, and that's a professional Army. And this one, to me, I mean, they're all important, so I don't want to, say that I like one or the other, but this one is really, really powerful to me. I mean, being ready is powerful. I get it. We've got to be ready, right? Being diverse is powerful, and so is integrated, and I'm going to talk to those in a minute. But when you think about a couple of the lines that we wrote, the Army is a profession, a highly expert, certified, and credentialed force resulting from years of increasingly rigorous training, education, and leader development. I mean, I'm in the epicenter right now of all of what I just said with you guys here today and out in the schools all across Jrotc. And I just think the more that we move the Army towards everyone seeing themselves as a professional, the more, and you may hear me say this again, will impact our recruiting and retention in the future. People want to be a part of a profession that they are proud of being and serving in. And we're finding in some of our, our data that there's a little bit of a disconnect with this current generation of youth and their propensity and kind of not seeing themselves in our mission. But being a member of a profession is very powerful, and anything that we can do to further that, the Army People Strategy is going to have a say in that, right? Its people treat one another with dignity and respect, retaining the trust and confidence of both the American people and each other. You guys all know, let's be honest here, a lot of our current learning has been in this space over the last couple of years. And if you don't know, there's a General Chris Norrie who leads our People First Task Force, and they are working really hard at bringing some solutions to this particular problem set or this end state and getting us where we have that retaining trust and confidence. And, a lot of times we think about, some people think that what happens inside of our Army, just affects the people that's inside the Army, but it absolutely does not. Everyone is connected to people outside of the Army. And what's really hard, and we sometimes don't have an impact on this, is that a story could be a not so good story, but when it goes outside of us, it can have the tendency to get even worse, right? Because the tail goes taller as it goes down the line, sort of thing. And we can't do anything about that, but except to limit those particular incidences to begin with. And so my hat is off to General Norrie and the things that the PFTF team are doing. And we hope to see their strategy soon get finished. And then we roll into some of the implementation of that. Lastly, Army professionals are people of character, presence, and intellect, committed to reflective practice and continuous learning. And I'm going to kind of during the challenge part of this talk about reflective practice and continuous learning, but you guys are well aware of that. They share a powerful, enduring identity as lifelong members of the Army team. And here we start talking about what? Soldiers for life, right? And once we have that, you know, that's going to be the secret sauce that really starts helping us with future recruiting and retention. So, and just summing up, you know, my biggest takeaway from the professional force and that end state is its great impact on recruiting and retention. And so if we all start thinking in those terms, you know, so much of that is tightly connected and weaved in what you guys are doing, that it's very important. I want to make sure I mention the other outcomes as we move through these. A diverse Army is absolutely essential. You know, there's the in-state language. It's committed, the Army's committed to equality of opportunity, providing all of our talented people with fulfilling and rewarding professional careers. As an inclusive and representative American institution, we ensure that our people possess a diversity of talent, knowledge, skills, and behaviors and preferences drawn from all corners of our country and its vibrant and diverse population. So, you know, one of these, you know, this is often talked about in recruiting and making sure that we have recruiters in the right parts or in all parts of our country that are recruiting folks into our service. And I think that they're doing a really good job at that. Years ago, they had an effort called Focus 22 Cities, which they looked at these large metropolitan areas and really getting inside of those cities and offering Army opportunity to where maybe before it wasn't as well. You hear about recruiting and you talk about the smile states. I'm sure if you guys have been around, you've heard about the smile states, which is like South Carolina to Texas, and how we have a lot of our recruits and our accessions come from the smile states. Well, that's presenting kind of a challenge to us now, right? Because the smile states also, we're finding are what? Vaccine hesitant. And so now we have where you have to have a vaccine to come in the Army. Your sweet spot was the smile states, and we, you know, we have kind of a little bit of a challenge there now, right? Of getting those recruits that we normally would get. And then the other piece to that is going into places that we've never been to before. And there's a hesitancy there of investing dollars when we haven't been able to get recruits from. We're exploring and experimenting with Jrotc. We find that Jrotc is a very positive impact on accessions. And so we've been looking at how we can expand that. There's a pilot that we started out of the Army People Strategy and the MIP called the Jrotc Cyber Pilot, where we're standing up and we're finding like super buzz about Jrotc Cyber. And so we're going to start, I think, 11 schools or 10 schools this fall. Then we're rolling out an additional set of 10 or 15 schools, I believe, the following year that are focused on Jrotc Cyber. We're going to expand regular Army Jrotc and our efforts to kind of get out into parts of the country that maybe we haven't been in as much in the past. Integrated. The Army has overcome legal, cultural, and technological barriers to fully harmonize the efforts and capabilities of its total force, the active guard, reserve, soldiers, and civilians. This transformation has dramatically increased the workforce permeability between those components and the benefit of both the Army and its people. And this, you know, we've got a lot of work to do, like the legal part of this. And I talked about this a little while ago when I talked about putting a special missions team together. But being able to move people in and out of different cohorts is going to be vital to our future. Having the right people on the right team, you know, we re-energized a program that this kind of a stop out program where people could, they're going along in their career and they need to kind of take time off for family or whatever, and then they could kind of come back and rejoin us. And even then, some of the biggest challenges of that, and you guys all know if you've been in uniform, is like once you start your kind of growth or your career track, it becomes really difficult to kind of step out 2 years or 3 years and then kind of rejoin and still think, you should be, where you should be, where you should have been. And so we've got to do a lot of work in that area, but our talent management folks are kind of working on that program and trying to, revitalize that as a way of keeping talent in the Army who just need some time out, to come back. They're also working on this integration effort so that we can, someone can be in the reserve component force, serve with us, until they're ready, and then come on the active force. Okay, so I want to make sure I hit on this slide a lot. I talked about the implementation plans and the annexes. That's what we've done in 20 and 21. In 20 and 22, someone asked the question about implementation. Oh, and so I'm walking away from the microphone. That's not smart. And so you see the dashboards up there. Another big thing that we got going this year was the Army People Strategy governance and making sure that we had governance along the way. So you have 2-star forums on the military and the civilian side. And then you have the 4-star forum with the CG of Jrotc, the ASA MNRA and the G1, and then respective leaders in the department and out in the Army that phone into that. And then an APS board of directors that goes up to the under vice secretary in chief, sergeant major of the Army, when it's appropriate to bring topics in before them out of this. Then I get you way over to the right side that says, well, where are we going where do we want to go in the future? And, so we're right now, I think, not I think, but Dr. Burskin's talked about MIP 2.0 and SIP 2.0. I always want to make sure they're two of the same cloth. They're just different cohorts. They are in the final staffing of the SIP, where it's due to be signed hopefully sometime in, I believe they're looking at it in end of July, maybe early August. We are about to put the MIP out for its GO SES level staffing. It's already went through Colonel and GS-15, got a number of comments back. We're adjudicating all of those, and then we'll send out the document again, the MIP, for 23 through 25. And so we'll roll straight into FY23, continuing to implement the Army People Strategy. One thing I do want to kind of talk about a difference we did. I was in a ASM one time, and I think it was General Calvert. So Dr. Hogue, when you put this out, are you going to put it in an implementation, glossy book, or are you going to put it into an XORD? And I said, well, we're actually talking about taking the words out of what we're staffing around and putting it in an Army XORD called Army People Strategy Implementation. And the reason why I think this is going to be very effective this time around, MIP 1.0 was primarily directed at Jrotc, MNRA, and G1. And so all those leaders signed it. So we figured all the leaders signed the implementation plan that's going back to their commands or their people. So I think we're good. In MIP 2.0, we're rolling in things that we're going to direct commanders out in the field to do, right, with regard to preventing and reducing harmful behaviors, improving positive organizational climate. So those are things that are outside of those 3 organizations that I mentioned, and that will go directly to organizations, FORCECOM organizations, ASCCs, DRUs, all of the like. And so we're going to put this in an Army XORD and then go straight to the G3 channels across the Army for implementation. And so we're very excited about that change in the hopes that we kind of hit a home run as far as execution of the implementation plans go. So I wanted to share that with you as we're looking to go forward. I think there's a slide over there of the Army People Synchronization Conference. I kind of talked about that a little bit. The Army has now it has 4 conferences in each of the different areas of modernization, readiness, equipping, and now people. And so we're working on coordinating and syncing all of those up so that they come and start and finish and complement each other. And so we've been working on the timing of this and where it goes and what it's going to do. And I think you're going to see a lot of good things come out of the Army People Synchronization Conference as far as manning the Army goes. Okay, so before I go into the final 10 minutes or so, where I kind of do a little bit of a challenge, and is there any questions on Army People strategy, lines of effort, critical enablers, near-term priorities, end states, any of that? Because I want to make sure I did a good overview. I talked while we talked today. I mentioned some of the things that we've learned along the way, so that's also been discussed. Yeah, you have your hand up.
Yes, sir. Beth Leader from the Intelligence Center of Excellence. So as I was listening to you talk about having a highly expert and certified force, one of the challenges we have at the schoolhouses is our instructors. So I would ask you to consider, are we using our Department of the Army civilians to the best extent possible? So for example, we've looked at trying to flip our pyramid because we know we're never going to get all of our military instructors. So could we professionalize our instructor force by having more Army civilians and using the military instructors that we have to teach those things which have to be taught by a military instructor? So I would ask you to consider within the Army People strategy, are we using our Department of the Army civilians to their best potential? The second thing I would ask is, as you talk about compensation, compensation for an instructor would be, I believe, appropriate and would help us attract perhaps instructors, because when you're on platform with young kids or seasoned folks, it doesn't matter. That's a hard duty day in, day out. And then the final thing I would ask is, have you given any thought to allowing an instructor to kind of permanently be instructor? So for example, my son is recruiting right now, and he's been offered to change MOSs and become a permanent recruiter, partly because they need them and partly because he's good at it. And I just wonder if you've ever thought about doing that with our instructor corps.
I mean, all great questions, and all fit into what we're trying to do in the Army People strategy by asking, what new ways can we do things that will serve our Army better? And so I'd welcome a conversation on this. Dr. Todd Four is our DASA CP SES back in the building. They're really starting to work on, cyber accepted service, and I think you said intelligence, but I think and then also I mentioned ACMA and really kind of getting after these different career branches, so to speak. And I think that could lead to some advancement in this area. But I also think, it's a conversation with Jrotc and what they're comfortable with as far as who's on the platform. A similar story I will relate with you, when I recruited for 4 years up in North Boston area, and there was a civilian that worked in our office in Salem, Massachusetts. This guy came to work. I wish I could remember his name, but it was like 38 years ago. But I was so envious of this gentleman because he came to work every day about 8:30, left every day at 5, and I was still there prospecting and trying to do things, so I could go home to eat dinner. But he was from that area. He knew everyone, and so the idea of a civilian recruiter has often been not looked upon because they're not wearing the uniform. You need to have someone who can talk to them, to young people, about what goes on in the Army and that kind of thing. And so just as the case you're mentioning, it just kind of takes maybe a pilot or something that can kind of test whether or not that idea is a good idea or not. The building is open, the ASA MNRA with the people strategy is kind of open to that. And that's what I'm going to get at here in the next few minutes. So it's good comments by you. I'm open to having a conversation with you and other members, and the Jrotc team on the viability of that and how it would come about in a pilot or however, it could happen. But we've got some lower level work to do before it kind of comes up to ASA MNRA. But I think the people strategy encourages things like that, discussions like that, experiments like that, pilots like that. And we ask all of you for your, your initiatives, for your, for your pilots, to put in the pages of the, you got to get your leadership to sign off on it. Hogue's not going to sign off on it, but you got to get your leadership on board with the experiment or the idea. And then, we're off and running. So, yes.
Yes, sir. Mike Dunning from the University of Kansas.
Hi.
I'm curious on the recruitment piece. I don't know what the exact percentages are, but I do recall that 50% of America's recruiting youth are unqualified, either physically fit, morally, mentally, whatever. And with that, is there any consideration in civilianizing more positions that are currently uniformed within the Army?
Yeah, this becomes, as we start looking out into, 2030, 2040, I mean, this is a very complex discussion in the Pentagon, right? What is the right mix of uniform, civilian, for what we need to get done, right? And balancing the force with the right uniform folks, officers, enlisted, warrants is its own challenge. You throw in civilians and contractors and where we should be using them and what we should, how we should be growing that expertise is just an ongoing conversation year after year. Right now we are, as I talked about the challenge of bringing in recruits, which is going to have an effect on the uniform population on the enlisted side for several years to come. We got to deal with that. We've got to figure out how we're going to deal with that. We're in a few years, we won't see as many sergeants as we need because we didn't see privates come in the Army this year. And I'm not talking 500 privates. I mean, you read the papers just like I do. It's a substantial amount, and it was last year, and it was 2018. So, I'm just being very honest and with teammates here. We've got some work to do when it comes to that. But you're right on, you're right on the nose though on how we're looking at the proper mix of what the right mix is. Mission-wise, we have to look at who can do the mission. There's legal implications that we have to work through with that. But yeah, we're looking at that 100%. Keith.
Yes, sir. I was involved with the building of MIP 1 and 2.0 and the way we collected initiatives and milestones for that. My question is, are we creating a process that allows that to be more dynamic than just once every 2 years as a review? So if we have a great idea, like Dr. Leader came up with, how do we inject those now into this process so that it's not the waiting game until it's updated again?
That's a great question, and that's another improvement that we made that I left off, and you helped me remember it. So as we move to putting the MIP tasks and metrics all into an Army XORD, we will frago that annually. And so it will not be this long wait before we do a whole nother implementation plan. As ideas come up that fit into the Army People Strategy and the MIP or the SIP, we will be collecting those, and we will have a time of writing and approval process, and they will go out as a frago to the Army People Strategy Implementation XORD. So absolutely, great question, and I hope a good answer. Yes.
Gordon Roy from the Cyber Center of Excellence. Yesterday, we had a couple of briefs on the Army credentialing program.
Yes, sir.
I'm curious whether or not you guys have discussed with them and worked with them to identify those individuals who have obtained credentials while they're on active duty or reserve status, and to track those guys and to target those, so when they get out of the Army, we can pull them back inside of the civilian workforce, and that way we can gain additional civilian workforce that also has the military experience and the credentials that were mapped out to transition inside of the civilian workforce?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was here when you asked that yesterday. And I think as a large type program, probably, I mean, a large type effort, you know, we probably have some work to do to identify all those people and make sure that we're moving those. One of the things that we are doing that will help with this is direct hiring authorities that make it easier for us to hire civilians with that have the appropriate background that we need, say cyber. And so in the soldier, the transition process, we need to be able to identify, and you know, individual soldiers should be kind of waving to us on his resume, and later on in IPSE, it's going to be on their back of their, you know, kind of the resume of these different credentials, right? The issue is going to be is they get a vote too. They may want to come and work as an Army civilian. They may want to go to Boeing or some other company and possibly, you know, make twice as much money. So, you know, we need to have a way to get there, but recognizing that the individual gets a vote as well. I like the idea of the whole credentialing thing. You may have been in here when I had my comments. I got super excited about credentialing and apprenticeships and all of that, and making our folks more highly qualified and more highly expertise in what they're doing for us in the Army or later on in the reserve component or National Guard for the Army team. This may surprise some of you. I mean, I love a soldier going out and transferring, you know, and doing well after they leave the Army. That's good for us. But as I indicated in here, our first and foremost effort is Army readiness. And so I would, you know, want everyone to go out and get a great job, but I really want the Army team to reap those benefits first and foremost. But I think we have some work to do to kind of, as we credential and we get that program more and more mature, how we can, and I think IPSE will have a lot to do with that when it comes on board this year or in the next year or two. All right, good questions. Let me just wrap this up with a little fun here, so to speak. So in the final 10 minutes, I'd like to just transition a bit, and I'm kind of intimidated because all of you guys are like in the learning business, and I feel like I'm not in the learning business, but I feel like it would be a good discussion. But I think a great achievement of the Army People Strategy has led us to have an appetite of experimentation. It's led us to have an appetite to learn. And it also, in some cases, it's led us to have an appetite to fail. And here's where I'm going to, you know, kind of hopefully get your attention. And last week I had the luxury of going on vacation, and I was reading a book on a beach called Never Stop Learning by Dr. Brad States out of Keenan Flagler School of Business at UNC Chapel Hill. And he spoke at an SES course that they sent me to a few months back. And he discusses in this book succeeding, failing, and learning through each of those. And so I kind of wanted to close out by just challenging all of us with a couple of questions. And I think that if we're a learning organization, and we say we're a learning organization, right, that all of us in the room should be learning something. And so I want to first challenge you that we should be learning something and have a personal history, like each one of you sitting in the chairs, personal history of learning things along the way. And so I hope you play along. Don't think too hard. No one's looking at you. No one's recording this. Well, maybe just me, I think. Just me, right? Because I'm the only one. I don't think anyone out there. So you're just me, right? So first question to you, and this is rhetorical, but you know, if you were sitting next to your buddy, is what have you learned lately? What skill, knowledge, ability have you personally learned within like the last 90 days that you can go, yeah, I did this. I took a class online and I learned how to, you know, build something, you know, or something. Because I think, you know, going back to my old days of be, no, do, this is something that if we're individual learners, we will kind of spread that to people who work for us. Just like if you're a PT nut and you love doing PT, chances are you kind of, that goes out to people who are around you, and, they might go out for a run with you unless you're just too fast, right? So what have you learned lately? Some other questions. And this is really fun. Show of hands, how many of you are comfortable with succeeding? Like you're comfortable with winning? And all right, about half of you. How many of you are comfortable with failing? This is great. I was not expecting this. Okay, it's about the same amount. How many of you would agree with this statement? You can learn a great deal from succeeding. A couple of hands. You can learn a great deal from failing. Almost 3/4 of the room, because you guys are knowing where I'm going with it. You're so smart. So I think overall we can say that we learn more from failing than succeeding, and that's kind of what Dr. States or Brad was going into. Imagine a room in the future where we'd have an equal showing of hands, which we almost did, because we really kind of understood the value and the learning component of failing, and we had room to do that, and we gave room for subordinates to do that. This is kind of what we're doing, and like some of the questions that came out today really are fascinating because they kind of fit in this approach. Brad gave an approach to failing that had 4 steps to it that I wanted to share with you. One's attention, reaction, explanation, and then adaptation, right? And I'm just going to 2 sentences on each of them as my time is expiring. Failing definitely gets our attention, doesn't it? And it also gets attention from other people. If you fail at something, your boss might know, or you're going to get his attention or her attention. It's just one of those things. You fail at something, get your kids' attention, or your kids fail at something, definitely going to get your attention. So it definitely gets our attention. By default, failing is an unexpected result, right? We don't walk around expecting to fail. So when it happens, it's an unexpected result and it gets our attention. The next thing is, and we bring emotions in here, is reaction. There's often a reaction to failing, and it's usually not good. Words that describe that reaction are shock, embarrassment, fear. Those are the kind of things that right now come when we think about failing. And oftentimes failing can paralyze us. It can paralyze us from even trying to do things because we go straight to that step and go, man, if we try this, this is going to end up bad. And part of this research that Brad did shows that we really, we overcompensate kind of how bad something's going to be. You remember your mom used to say, oh, it's not that bad. It's really not that bad. And oftentimes she's right? We make this big thing in our head about something and it wasn't that bad at all. Mom was right. So that's just a lesson right there about your moms, is that they're normally right. But it's really, we overemphasize the negative part of failing to the point where it's hard for us to even do new things or experiment. In fact, research shows us we're so afraid that if I were to offer you a 50% bet that you would either win $5 from me or lose $3, most of you wouldn't even take the bet or the offer. I don't want to call it a bet because you don't want to lose $3, or if it's 500 or 300, whatever. So that's kind of just an interesting way that we approach the thought of failing. But we get to the 3rd step, and it's called explanation. And this is where the learning occurs. When we try to understand what happened, right? Because we tried something new. When you try something new, that basically means you've never done it before. And so you're trying to understand what happened in the process. You're getting away from the outcome that you failed, and you're looking at the process to see why did that happen. And that's where your learning occurs. A lot of times we're so focused on outcomes, on things, that we get away from the process, which tells us what happened and gives us an opportunity to learn. And we search for new information when we do this, right? You're looking at step 1, say, oh man, what happened? There's something must have happened here. It's new information. And adaptation, which is the last step, uses this new information, and we adapt. And this is both cognitive and emotional. when we learn this. You kind of have this relief moment, you know, like, ah, okay, that's what happened. And you learn to adapt because when we understand why we failed and how the understanding and how this new understanding can move us forward, it stabilizes the emotions that I talked about back in the reaction step. And so that's just a little approach that kind of I like. Wow, that's kind of interesting. And I thought I would share this in this epicenter of learning that I got to speak in. And so in closing, in the future Army People Strategy, we should continue to experiment. These questions that we had about experimenting, I am so excited to hear, and let's continue the conversation. Some of you who've worked with me, you know that I'm open to phone calls and meetings, my schedule. You just book it and we'll have a discussion. We'll try to go somewhere forward on it. We should continue experimentation. We should continue to do more pilots. We should continue to do more initiatives. So don't lose that. From these new efforts, we will learn things. And that's what it's all about. We have to keep learning to make the future Army People Strategy a success. So I like where we're headed. This afternoon, you're going to hear, I hope, from, well, I know you're going to hear from General Funk. I don't quite know what his talk is going to be about, but hopefully he mentions kind of what we've learned from the Command Assessment Program, Project Athena you guys are out here doing. Some of you may be in this room. I'm very excited about that. Talent-based branching, we moved to that a couple of years ago. The JROTC Cyber and many other Cyber Pilot and many other programs. And so I like the way that we're experimenting. We need to do it in all lines of effort and all of the annexes and continue to move forward. So as important to ask yourself, what have you learned lately, which was what I asked you. Another great question that I'll leave you with is, what will you learn soon? And so with that, I conclude my talk. And I think I have just a few more minutes if you have any questions, but I think I'm towards my end, Keith, right? But we got time. Any questions? Obviously not about the whole learning thing, because you guys are pros at that. The fact that I even tried to attempt that, you guys are probably like, how dare he? Yes, sir.
Hey, sir. Over the past 2 days, we've heard the commander mention this, and you mentioned it. And I'd like to know what the resources are that you gentlemen have referred to that talk about what happened to the non-commissioned officer corps during the Vietnam War, because I believe that we as an Army can read that, learn, and move forward, because we are at a changing point that we've talked about in here several times. And I have never, in my 32 years of experience, have never even seen these articles or read this. I've read snippets of what we've learned past that, but I really want to drill into that, because I think we're kind of suffering from some of the same thing in that line of effort in our PMEs. Over.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it requires some study from now, right? Because we're in a different place in our country than we were in 65 to 75, which is, I think, the time frame that General Martin talked about. Yeah, I thought about the master sergeant that had a big impact on me probably came in the Army in 1965. Because 1985 was 20 years later, and he was telling me, you're going to do this. And then, you know, we've just went through 20 years of you know, high kind of combat operations, and now we're coming back off of that. But we're a different place in our country with technology. With, you know, it's such a big, complex problem. So not to evade your question, I think it needs some study and how we can. I think we have some precedents that we could start to look at, but I would be careful not to say this is this, and so this is the answer, right? I think it's a starting point, and I think it's worth some study to kind of see what's going on with soldiers. You know, a lot of times they mimic what's going on in society in America, and so you have, you know, some problems that are out there that we have in the Army, and they're just because they are us, we are them, you know what I mean? So I would answer you by saying I think we just need to study that. I think people have an idea that they're kind of aligning the Vietnam event that happened with 20 years of combat. Okay, they look the same, you know, looks like a duck, acts like a duck, you know, and there may be some synergies there, but I think we need to do some study there. Hope that answered your question. Any other questions for me? Okay, well, it's been great spending some time with you this morning. And if you have any other thoughts or questions that you want, just see, I'll be here the rest of the symposium. Look forward to chatting with you. And Dr. Keith, thank you. General Foley, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hogue. Very insightful into how we've pulled that together, and interesting in my mind, having seen the MIP most specifically as it has evolved and grown, and we've gotten better at identifying what we want to do, measuring it, and knowing we're making progress. We've got a transition now to some of our concurrent sessions. So you've got one concurrent session this morning. Then when we reconvene after lunch, we'll be back in this room to have the talent management presentation by General Funk. And then you've got 2 more opportunities for concurrent sessions after that. So thank you for being here again this morning, and pick your poison for the things you want to attend today. Thank you.